Great recap. I had a question for you regarding the 90-day pause. A lot of us had heard that, weren't sure if it was true. You said it was false. Do you think that the Trump administration maybe had that idea floated, but decided that it would make them look weak, or the tariffs a bad idea, and therefore that's why it was paused?
Anybody's theory on this could be true. I have no inside knowledge on this. As far as I know, the the quote or the rumor was attributed to Kevin Hassett. Was then debunked by the White House explicitly. Whether it was a trial balloon, whether it was Hassett speaking out of turn, or anything else, I don't know the truth to it. And frankly, if I'm an investor, I am putting zero value in it because I believe that the downside risk here is so much greater to the extent that that was entirely false or entirely out of the potential possibility. The downside is much worse than if, in fact, there is a possibility of a 90-day pause, because a 90-day pause would simply mean that we're going to go ahead and take 90 days to potentially go ahead and try to speak to other countries and work something out. At this point, I'll finish with this. At this point, the one thing that is the worst of this is no country knows what the U.S. is expecting of them. We knew this from before when Israel came out, even before the tariffs were announced, and said, we're going to go to zero on U.S. imports today. And that was ignored in terms of the tariffs that were applied to Israel. Today, we had Vietnam come out and say, we're going to zero. The response from the White House is, that is not enough. What is enough then? What
David, if we go to zero, like let's say we go to zero with the EU, right? That means that we would have to go to zero too, and that means that all the steel and aluminum tariffs that the U.S. charges Europe will go to zero. So I don't see any way that the Trump White House would actually agree to a zero for zero deal, especially with the EU. Maybe with some smaller countries, but I can't see that happening with the EU.
I don't disagree.
And David, if I can ask you a follow-on question.
Let me just finish my thought, because the point I was making, Ed, this is the important point. Our counterparties do not know what is being asked of them. And you emphasize that point, which is, yes, I agree with you. A zero for zero won't work with the EU. What exactly will work for the EU? The EU doesn't know. They don't know what they're negotiating against right now. This has the potential, if the White House doesn't get clear on this, this has the potential of being very chaotic. Again, if I'm Trump or the Trump White House, I certainly don't want to negotiate against myself. As a matter of fact, I want my counterparty to negotiate against itself. And that's what they're currently doing. The question is can the U.S. economy survive long enough for all of our...
He went out for me. Same for you,
Jeff? He went out for me. I think hopefully we get David back. But one of the things I kind of wanted to ask David, and hopefully we can get him back, or to many of the speakers who might be joining, is that one of the things that I'm trying to square the kind of the Trump policy from the economic sense, right? Is this a scenario now where the Trump administration is actually aiming to achieve absolute global free trade, or is this an onshoring, right? Because the argument we've historically heard is that free trade is bad for the United States. And now I hear, well, we want free trade as such, because that's necessarily for the lowership of the reduction of tariffs. I mean, it's free trade, right? So is that the goal, or is this an onshoring?
But does free trade also mean no other trade barriers, no subsidies?
Correct. In many ways, those were negotiations happens. I mean, there's the Trans-Pacific Partnership that during the 2016 election, President Trump ran heavily against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, ran heavily against NAFTA. Then we got the USMCA, which back then was the best deal ever made, and now clearly it is not. And then there was conversations, well, is he using tariffs for a negotiation tactic related to Canada and Mexico and fentanyl and drugs? And I think that's one of the issues is the messaging is kind of all over the place. Because if it's more for onshoring and increased production and outside the United States, that's one economic policies that you have to achieve. And to your point, and I would assume that would require massive amount of subsidies. We had a space about that. For example, we had stock
I'm
talks.
referring to subsidy. I'm referring to subsidies other countries give their
Correct.
industry.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
to me, it's almost impossible to tell the rest of the world you're not allowed to subsidize your own industry, your own manufacturing, in your own country. I mean, I think that's stepping beyond what a U.S. president should be able to do.
And the other thing that I think it's also an interesting dynamic is that President Trump yesterday, while I believe it was on Air Force One, he was talking to reporters, and one of the things he mentioned was we want to have trade surpluses with other countries. And again, the question that becomes is the goal when he says something like that. It means we have to completely reformat the U.S. economy from a service base to a manufacturing base and be an exporter, right? As the largest consumer, obviously, we're going to have significantly large imports into the United States, right? And that's not possible. And that's something that I think is also being forgotten very importantly, that we do have very large exports in the terms of services. Our service export is unrivaled. That's obviously not a way that it can be measured in trade deficits, but service export is very key. But I just don't see how the Trump administration trying to achieve trade surpluses with other countries when we're the largest consumer, we would have to basically degrade our economy into an export-based model and really sacrifice the services and consumption acts. But I know, David, you kind of glitched out a little bit, and I kind of jumped in. But again, I'm going to go back to this. What I think one of the reasons why stock markets are reacting the way they're reacting is because of the uncertainty. And I'm going to ask you this and get your opinion. First, tariffs were used for specific negotiation tactics when they were talking about Mexico and Canada because of fentanyl, drug migration, etc. Then it was reindustrialization, onshoring, and now it's free trade. And I just don't see how you can square all those at once. And I think one of the issues that the Trump administration, David, I love your opinion, it's the messaging aspect and how this was rolled out and the lack of confidence in the market. And that's why we're seeing stock markets, crashing right now. What do you think, David?
I think Trump deliberately does not send out clear messaging. That is not his style. Plus, you add to that, he's got a couple of conflicting voices, it seems, inside in Harold Lutnick, Scott Bessent, Pete Navarro. So getting messaging to be uniform, I think would be first of all a tall task, but B, I think Trump prefers it this way. I think he has always run himself, his businesses, his personal life. He's run it on being the agent of chaos. And I look, if I had to choose a team to be on here on the world stage, I would want to be on Trump's team because right now it's bad, but certainly we're not. Our stock market isn't down 13% today like Hong Kong, and I bet you, yes, I know Hong Kong didn't go down as much on Thursday and Friday of last week, but I bet you Hong Kong certainly has a lot more to fall than our stock market does. And right now, and I'll go back to this point, which is right now,